So, video games. They're a common pastime nowadays, but it hasn't always been the case. Back in the 1970s, around 1972 to be exact, the Magnavox Odyssey first debuted along with the arcade cabinet of Pong. And of course, as things would move along, video games would grow and thrive and eventually become part of the mainstream. They would become a brief flicker as part of the subculture of America's entertainment industry. And around 1983, everything went dark. What the hell happened? Well, in gaming history, we refer to what happened between the years of 1983 and 1985. In the West, we call it the Great Video Game Crash of 1983. In Japan, they called it the Atari Shock. But what in the hell happened? Well, a number of contributing factors happened to play into what caused the video game market to basically tank in the United States between the years of 83 and 85. But one of the leading contributing factors, or at least the one that everybody points their fingers to, was the release and successive failure of E.T. the Extraterrestrial for the Atari 2600. And the thing that sucks is that it's not even the guy who developed the game's fault. Like, the poor bastard was just trying to make a game to sell, but he was given a 5-week schedule in order to meet the holiday deadline set by the CEOs, because they wanted to have a killer app for the Christmas season of that year. And E.T. was the big license to have. They printed 4 million carts of E.T. the Extraterrestrial. 3.5 million of those wound up being returned to Atari HQ as unsold merchandise. Let that sink in. Now, of course, legend says, and legend has been proven, that E.T., a bunch of carts of E.T., along with other Atari games, would eventually be dumped in a landfill outside of Alamogordo, New Mexico, and basically buried to be forgotten until they were dug back up in 2014. But there were numerous contributing factors to what led to the video game crash of 83. You know, you had an oversaturation on the market for consoles. There were, like, everywhere you looked, you lifted up a stone, somebody else was trying to sell you a new video game console. You had the ColecoVision, you had the Intellivision, you had the Magnavox Odyssey, the Odyssey 2, you had, like, all of these other little systems that kept coming up, and the problem was there were too many of them. You had too many options. You know, it was like you go to a salad bar, but unfortunately it's like jumbo sized. You have too much to choose from. The second contributing factor was the fact that there was no publisher control, like no proper publisher controls. So you had people who were basically third parties developing their own games for the Atari and all these other systems. If they could get their hands on a cartridge, if they had a computer at home to program these games on, they could make it, they could make copies of it, they could ship them out, and they were some of the worst, most abysmal garbage you have ever seen. And they were absolutely flooding the market with this abysmal trash that literally nobody wanted to play. In fact, one of the big companies that, you know, kind of surfaced around this time period, Activision, actually got in big trouble with Atari because they were publishing games without Atari's say-so. They were a third-party developer producing games without Atari's say-so, and Atari even sued them over it, but failed to get a proper restraining order filed against them. Womp womp. Now, yet another contributing factor was the fact that around this time period, home gaming consoles were kind of falling off, while home gaming PCs were starting to rise. A lot of people were going like, well, hey, why don't I get this, get this PC and I can make my own games, and look at these other companies that are developing these fancier, more flashy, whiz-bang games on these computers that can play better looking games than, say, the Atari or the ColecoVision or Intellivision or Odyssey or what have you. And all of this basically led to... video games were being called, at the time, both arcade and home console games were more or less being referred to as the hula hoop kind of trend where, oh, it was big and popular, but now it's falling off. It was a temporary fad. It was a trend. It was a flash in the pan sort of thing. Of course, in 1985, at the end of the crash, Nintendo would basically, the land of the rising sun would deliver us a gift and be like, here, have this thing. It's called the Nintendo Entertainment System Control Deck. They did everything in their power to try to distance it from a home gaming console as possible. They did not market it as a home gaming console. They marketed it as an entertainment system. They didn't want people to associate it with the word video game, because video game was still a very taboo word in the marketing world. In fact, one thing that they did in the US when they released the Nintendo Entertainment System in order to try to boost sales to get interest was they bundled it with an accessory, the ROB, Robot Operating Buddy, because during the time in the 1980s, around 1985, robots were the big thing with kids. They'd see a robot and they'd go, oh yeah, that's cool, I want that! And let's be completely honest. The ROB, it was not the best accessory to come out of Nintendo. It did help push units. They only made 2 games for it, but it did help push units, and it's now a collector's piece. I want to get my hands on one. And he's an awesome fighter in Smash, but I digress. And, starting in 1985, granted, I will say this. Originally, they had intended on bringing the Famicom to the United States around 1983, but the effects, the aftershocks of the Atari shock, more or less made it so that Japan was kind of like, oh god, maybe we should delay this until we could find a way to actually market it and sell it in America, because they saw what happened and they're like, oh god, if we release this now, nobody's gonna want to buy this. But hey, 1985 came and went, the Nintendo Entertainment System came. We got lots of great games on it. There was a lot of quality control, although that could be questioned. But at the end of the day, it was like we had the Nintendo Entertainment System, we had the Sega Master System, and we also had the TurboGrafx 16. Now, mind you, the TurboGrafx 16 and the Master System, they were kind of flash in the pan, a little forgettable. But then, years later, Sega drops what would be known across the world as the Mega Drive, or what would be known in America as the Genesis, as it was supposed to be a new dawn for Sega as a company. And by God, suddenly Nintendo and Sega had a rivalry to rock the ages, at least up until the PlayStation came out, in which case then we had Sega, Sony, and Nintendo butting heads with each other until Sega would finally fly a little too close to the sun and melt their wings of wax with the Dreamcast and became a third-party software developer from then on. Did you know they're making another Atari a cartridge-based console that's going to be backwards compatible with old Atari games? That's crazy. It's something I never saw coming for a million miles away. Anyway, if you liked this, leave a like, leave a comment, subscribe, all that other fun junk. You don't have to. I'm just doing this to please the algorithm. I've been Vac the Fox. I'll see you later.